you again for joining today's webinar. A little background: Ohio EPA's new scrap tire rules went into effect on June 30th, 2023. This webinar will provide an overview of the significant programmatic changes to the rules that include scrap tire storage requirements and exclusions from having to become a licensed scrap tire facility or registered scrap tire transporter. So we welcome Shannon Cohen-Denson, Ohio EPA's Division of Materials and Waste Management Scrap Tire Unit, to present today's webinar.
Thanks everyone for coming today. As Jeff mentioned, the scrap tire rules did go into effect on June 30th. This has been a long haul. It's taken us 6 years to get these rules through sign off, and we're really excited about the changes we've made. This training is designed to try and cover the rule changes that would be important to inspectors. So we will get started. Jeff, are you going to advance the slides?
Yep, you're ready.
Okay, yep, ready. So the information that I plan to cover today includes rules layout, what are the general changes to the scrap tire rules, what has changed for the scrap tire management infrastructure. And what I mean by scrap tire management infrastructure is really the system that Ohio has in place to manage scrap tire. So that includes scrap tire generating businesses and operations, scrap tire transporters, scrap tire facilities, and then beneficial uses. And then lastly, I will go over some resources that will be available to inspectors to help them kind of navigate the changes to the rules. And then, of course, just resources we've always had to help them perform inspections and understand the regulations. Next slide, please. So let's kind of go over rules layout. The scrap tire rules have followed a similar path as the compost, transfer facility, and the licensing rules, and now are in their own chapter, Chapter 580. Next slide, please. Like so many of the programs in DMWIM, the scrap tire rules have been housed in Chapter 27 since their inception, which was in 1996. As a result, a crosswalk has been created to help inspectors see where the requirements for the various scrap tire rules in Chapter 27 are now located in Chapter 580. As seen here on the slide, a tab was created for each rule in Chapter 27. Each rule tab contains a table that identifies each paragraph in the old rule and where the requirements in the paragraph moved into Chapter 580. So for example, here we see on the screen that the requirement for an application that used to be in 2754 A1A now is located in 580-100A. A copy of the crosswalk will be placed in the chat, and we will also try to find a place on the Scrap Tire webpage to post this crosswalk. Next slide, please. One proposed change was to number the rules in a format that would make it easy to understand where to find information. So rules numbered 1 through 99 are dedicated to the general obligations that almost all parts of the scrap tire management infrastructure are subject to. For example, one example is the shipping paper system that impacts almost every aspect of the scrap tire management infrastructure. Next slide, please. Most pieces of the scrap tire management infrastructure have been given their own number series. So for example, for transporters, the rules that cover them are the 100 series. For the scrap tire collection facility, they are covered under the 200 series, the storage facility, the 300 series, recovery, the 400 series, mobile recovery, the 500 series. The monocell just has one rule, and then the monofill is the 700 series, and the beneficial use is the 800 series. Within each series, the same rule numbering is used to identify what the rule covers. So for example, for operation, all of those rules would end in 10. For record keeping and reporting, all those rules end in 15. Closure, the rules end in 25, and so on and so on. Next page, please. Or next slide. So now I want to just go over some notable changes for the rules numbered 1 through 99. 580.01 is the applicability rule. And I think what is important to point out here is that, as I mentioned that series in the previous slide, that same series that is applicable to each piece of scrap tire management infrastructure is actually identified in the applicability rule. So someone who is new to the tire rules or actually new to Chapter 580, which everyone is, should be able to go to 580.01 and identify, okay, I want to become a registered transporter, or I don't want to become a registered transporter. Where would I look to figure out which rules are applicable to me? Here, the applicability rule lays it out for you. Focus on rules 580.100 to 580.125. Next slide, please. OEC Rule 3745, 580.04 is really a very important rule. And so I want to spend a little bit of time on that. This rule lays out the structure from the Ohio Revised Code for how scrap tires have to be managed in Ohio. It is designed that anyone that generates, possesses, or stores scrap tires can read 580.04 and determine if they are regulated. With that in mind, I would like to go through each paragraph in this rule. Next slide, please. 580.04a. So this particular paragraph lays out the requirement to become a registered scrap tire transporter. It essentially says, unless you're excluded by Rule 3745, 580.105, no person generating, storing, or possessing scrap tires shall cause or allow more than 10 scrap tires to be transported by any person who is not registered as a scrap tire transporter. It also adds that a registered scrap tire transporter has the obligation of completing shipping papers. So anyone that is not, familiar with the tire universe can go to A and say, oh, okay, I'm transporting 10 or less tires at a time. I don't have any obligations. But if I want to transport more than 10, I either have to be excluded from the requirement to become a registered transporter, or I have to become a registered scrap tire transporter. Next slide. B just borrows from 2705, and it just makes it very clear that scrap tires cannot be open dumped or burned. Next slide. This paragraph C is very important because it really lays out the structure that is in Ohio Revised Code 3734. Essentially, if you're not excluded by Rule 205, which is the exclusions for scrap tire collection facilities, 583.05, which is the exclusion from having to become a scrap tire storage facility, or 584.05, which is the exclusion from having to become a scrap tire recovery facility, then any person who stores, possesses, or processes more than 100 scrap tires is obligated to obtain a permit to install or registration certificate, as applicable, and a license to operate. To not obtain these authorizing documents constitutes open dumping. So we're here on record as specifying, unless you are excluded, if you have more than 100 tires, you have to become a licensed scrap tire facility. Next slide. D addresses what your obligations are if you have, or what your obligations are, but more where we kind of get involved as an agency if you have 100 or fewer scrap tires. So essentially, if you do not store tires in such a manner that they cause a nuisance or a hazard of public health or safety, we're not going to regulate you. If you are storing tires and you have less than 100 and you are creating a nuisance or a hazard of public health, then that's going to be it constitutes open dumping, and Ohio EPA may take action. Next slide, please. E just specifies if there is a tire fire and there's more than 100 involved in that tire fire, then you will have to comply with our scrap tire remediation rule, which is in 3745, 580.31. Next slide, please. F specifies, unless you're excluded by 3745, 580.805, no person generating, storing, or possessing more than 100 scrap tires shall use the scrap tires in a beneficial use manner unless that beneficial use is authorized in accordance with 3745, 580, 801, which is the pre-authorized uses that's placed in rule, or 3745, 580, 802, which is where you have to actually seek approval from the director of Ohio EPA to use tires in a beneficial use manner that's not already identified in rule. And then G actually is just a policy that we have had in place that we decided to make a requirement. Many inspectors have witnessed businesses stuffing cars full of scrap tires prior to crushing, shredding, shearing, or baling the vehicle. This practice has never been condoned by Ohio EPA, but now it is essentially illegal. So we've actually taken this policy we've had in place and put it in rule. And essentially how it reads is, the number of scrap tires that are allowed to be placed in a vehicle is equal to the number of tires designed to be installed on the vehicle plus the spare tire minus the number of tires still installed on the vehicle. So an example, before this is prior to the car being or vehicle being crushed, shredded, sheared, or baled. So for example, if you go to a motor vehicle salvage lot and there's a sedan there and there's one tire still installed on the vehicle, they're essentially allowed to have 4 tires in the vehicle. It may be a little confusing, and if you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me, or if there are any questions now, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. And as I'm going through this whole presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to ask, to interject with questions. Okay, next slide, Jeff. So OAC Rule 3745, 58009 is the scrap tire conversion factor rule. And we've discussed this before because we've been working on these rules for a long time. But I just want to reiterate for you guys that we've had a change to the passenger tire equivalent in rule. So hold on a sec. Okay.
Also, Shannon, we do have a question.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
How do they get permit if more than 100 tires?
Well, I guess it depends on the type of facility. So if it's a collection facility, they would get a registration. They would have to apply for a registration certificate. So, well, let me step back. So I guess I don't know which type of facility we're talking about. If we're talking about a PTI, which is going to be the larger of the storage facility or the recovery facility, that would actually be a paper application that would go to the district office. If we're talking about a collection facility or a Class 2 scrap tire storage facility or a Class 2 recovery facility, which are the smaller of those types of facilities, they would actually submit a registration application through eBiz.
Okay. And Emily, does that answer your question? Okay, just tire sellers like tire discounters.
Okay, so someone like Tire Discounters is a retail store, and so the expectation, and I'll kind of get into this a little bit later in the presentation, is that they are going to meet that exclusion. So, someone like a Tire Discounters really should not be seeking to be a licensed scrap tire facility. But if they want to be a licensed scrap tire facility, they probably want to be one of the smaller storage ones, and they would probably submit a registration application through eBiz.
Anything, other questions or anything to add to that? Oh. Shana, I'm not seeing anything else.
Okay. Okay. And we can touch on that a little bit later in the presentation if I need to kind of provide more clarification. So again, this rule covers the scrap tire conversion factor. And one thing I just wanted to point out is that we have had a change to the passenger tire equivalent. Passenger tire equivalent is a unit of measurement for converting various scrap tire sizes and processed scrap tires into a standard weight for estimating numbers or volumes of scrap tires. Actually, since the inception of the program, it's been 20 pounds, and now it has been updated to 25 pounds. And a good way to kind of think about this is before, when you would see a ton of tires, you would think, okay, there's about 100 passenger tire equivalents in that, essentially about 100 passenger tire or light duty truck tires would make up that pile. Now it's going to be more like there's 80 passenger tires or light duty trucks that make up that ton. And the reason for the change is that we as a society have moved towards larger vehicles. We've moved away from sedans, and now we tend to drive crossovers, SUVs and light duty trucks. And as a result, those tires are larger and heavier. Next slide. I just want to touch on this slide because for a long time we have, because the scrap tire facilities are eligible to apply for registration certificates, we really have not had a lot of direction, I guess, or even policy about when a Class 2 or a Class 2 facility or a scrap tire collection facility has triggered how they go about the process of getting an administrative change or when they've kind of triggered an alteration. And so what we try to do in this rule is to kind of lay out the process for requesting an administrative change, what would kind of constitute an administrative change for these facilities that are under registration certificates. We've also tried to do that for when they possibly lay out when they trigger an alteration versus when they've triggered a modification. Again, this is for those Class 2 storage facilities and recovery facilities, and also the collection facility that are under registration certificates. We also just kind of share, of course, that all of them go about requesting a variance or an exemption similar to how you would if you had a PTI, or if you're just, under the solid weight under ORC 3734. And then we also lay out in this rule when you've, where to go to see if you've triggered a modification, and which particular rule in the chapter 580 takes you through that process of making a change because you've triggered a modification. Next slide. So this is the last rule in the 1 through 99 series that I want to kind of go over. We've always had a scrap tire remediation rule, and that rule was 3745/2779. Now it has become OAC Rule 3745/580/31, and I just want to highlight some of the important changes that have taken place by providing kind of a side-by-side comparison. So under 3745/2779, we used to differentiate between the number of tires involved in a tire fire. So yeah, there's one set of standards if the amount of tires in the tire fire were 10,000 passenger tire equivalents or less, and then additional requirements if the tire fire included more than 10,000 passenger tire equivalents. Under the new Rule 580/31, we do not differentiate between the number of tires involved in a tire fire. You still have the notification requirement that was required in 79, and now it's in 31, and you have to notify Ohio EPA and the local health department there's been a tire fire and provide certain information identified in the rule. You still have to remove all whole and partially burned scrap tires, and you still have to containerize fire residual and have it removed from the site. In 79, when you have the larger tire fire, you are required to prepare a characterization and remediation plan to address soil, surface water, and groundwater contamination. Now under 580/31, you just have to clean up the surface soils to visual standards. And if any more remediation is required, then the site will come under, or a responsible person will come under director orders or approved Board of Health orders for additional remediation. Next slide. Okay, so now I kind of want to spend some time talking about those scrap tire generating businesses and operations that are excluded from having to become licensed scrap tire facilities. And the main reason I want to do that is because they have, I think when we've updated the rules, they have had the biggest change. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that. Next slide. Thank you. So when I'm talking about those businesses and operations excluded from having to become a licensed scrap tire facility, the bulk of them are identified here on the slide. We're talking about tire retailers. We're talking about tire retreaders, motor vehicle salvage dealers. We're talking about solid waste facilities that we regulate, construction and demolition facilities that we regulate. And we're also talking about municipalities or townships that store scrap tires from that they obtain from public roads and public lands, etc. There are a few more, but I didn't add them all to the slide. But this is the bulk of those scrap tire generating businesses and operations. Next slide, please. So here, what I want to really do is provide a side-by-side comparison of the change in regulations for these types of businesses and operations. So they used to be regulated under 3745, 2760. Now they would be regulated under 3745, 5805. So under 2760, the mosquito control that was performed essentially was that when they received tires, incoming loads of tires, they had 24 hours to remove the liquids from those tires or apply a pesticide. And then they had to store those tires dry or through the application of a pesticide. Now under 5805, we've removed that 24-hour window to address mosquito control when those tires essentially arrive at the business or operation. They're supposed to remove the water from those tires if they contain water, or they're supposed to apply a pesticide. You're going to see throughout this whole rule package, we've really tried to simplify mosquito control. And so when the inspector gets to the site, the expectation is that the tires are dry or they can prove that they've applied a pesticide. Under 2760, we had extensive fire code storage requirements for these types of businesses and operations. We have removed that from rule. Ohio EPA will not be enforcing the fire code at these types of businesses and operations anymore. We still are going to enforce fire code for our licensed scrap tire facilities, but not for these businesses and operations that are excluded from having to become licensed scrap tire facilities. But what that has been replaced with is a requirement for them to secure their scrap tires at the place of business. So they can do that by placing the tires in enclosed and locked structures, which include buildings and containers. They can fence in the tires. They can put them behind physical barriers. They can lock the tires up with, by running a cable or a chain through them, or they can use security cameras. Now, someone has made the point, well, a security camera really doesn't secure a scrap tire, but we were trying to build flexibility into the requirement, and it certainly acts as a deterrent. So that is the really big change that we want inspectors to be aware of. Again, when you go out to these types of businesses, tire retailers, motor vehicle salvage dealers, any of these places, we're no longer making sure that they are storing their tires in compliance with the fire code, but we expect them to secure the scrap tires at the place of business. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So now let's just go into detail about a couple of these businesses that are excluded from having to become scrap tire facilities. So one thing I wanted to point out about retailers is that there has not been a change to the exclusion as written. One thing we did do was made the exclusion a little shorter, or the requirement, the condition for meeting the exclusion a little shorter. And so a portion of it has been placed as a comment. Next slide. But what I really want to focus on here is that we know that inspectors have had past experiences where people have claimed to be a tire retail shop. They sell new tires, which I think is a little easier to kind of wrap your mind around. But many of these businesses that sell used tires have claimed to be retail tire stores and therefore eligible for this exclusion. So one thing we want to kind of share with inspectors that is at a minimum, these places of business need to actually have an active vendor's license with the Department of Taxation. And so what I've provided here on the slide is actually a link to the list of active vendors that the Department of Taxation maintains. Next slide. So when you actually go to this web page, there's a list of active vendors, and you can just click into that document. It's a spreadsheet, and for every county in Ohio, they identify all businesses that are actually licensed vendors. And so that is a good place to start to try to determine if this is a legitimate business, to determine if they are eligible for this exclusion. Next slide. Now, one exclusion where we actually did change the language was for the exclusion in 2761A2C that used to read, the premises of a business that removes tires from motor vehicles in the ordinary course of business. Our policy and our understanding of Ohio Revised Code, which supported our policy, was that this exclusion was only ever meant for motor vehicle salvage dealers that are licensed under Chapter 4738. Therefore, we updated the language to actually reflect the type of business that is eligible for this exclusion. Next slide. And so one way that you can, of course, and you all probably know this, but one way that you can determine if a motor vehicle salvage dealer is actually legitimate, is it supposed to be licensed through the Ohio BMV, and you can actually go to their website and put in the name of the business and determine if they have a license. So junkyards and scrapyards are not eligible for this exclusion. They are regulated under Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4737. Next slide. Just want to point out an additional requirement that we've added to an exclusion that we've always had from requiring solid waste transfer facilities and CDD facilities, and now we've added in CDD processing facilities. So they've always had an exclusion from having to become a licensed scrap tire facility, but we have modified that exclusion a little bit. Next slide. So to meet this exclusion, they've always had to obtain scrap tires that had either been pulled from loads of waste or delivered in a single load of 10 or less scrap tires, and they've always been required to store those scrap tires in portable enclosed containers. Well, now in rule, we have put a limit on the amount of scrap tires that they are allowed to have on site. And essentially, they are limited to of aggregate volume of containers that doesn't exceed 5,000 cubic feet. This limit is the same for a licensed scrap tire collection facility. Next slide. And I just want to make you aware of two exclusions that we've actually decided to put in rule so that there's no real question about if these types of practices businesses that have these practices have to become a licensed scrap tire recovery facility. So there's been this really big boom in Ohio and probably all over the country for the use of tire-derived chip as mulch. So we just want to make it clear that if someone is buying tire-derived chip from a recovery facility and they are just adding a colorant to that mulch and selling it as a tire product, they do not have to become a scrap tire recovery facility. And then just want to make it clear, anyone that is purchasing crumb rubber from a scrap tire recovery facility and then taking that crumb rubber and turning it into a molded product or any product is not required to become a scrap tire recovery facility. That crumb rubber is really at that point where it's no longer considered a scrap tire. Next slide. So now I'd like to just share some information or some of the major changes for scrap tire transporters. Next slide. So there are this is a really important exclusion that I just want to make people aware of. So, a lot of times we have these nonprofit organizations, universities, or other civic organizations that will go out and perform scrap tire cleanups. They'll do river sweeps, and in the past, they have. Some of them have used registered transporters to deliver the tires to an authorized location. We really don't want these types of activities to have the burden of using a registered transporter. And so we created an exclusion that allows them to use government-owned or leased vehicles or designated privately owned vehicles that have been donated to just transport those tires to an authorized location. Next slide. We crafted this exclusion because we became aware of a practice that has been, we're finding out is really very common in Ohio, and it needed to really be dealt with. So a lot of these recovery facilities and registered transporters actually cold tires, and then they have these trailer loads of essentially used tires, which are still scrap tires. These trailers of used tires that possibly, based on the condition of the tire, would not be something that meets a standard for Ohio, but it definitely would meet, say, a standard for in another country, or even maybe in a warmer state. They've been taking these trailers of tires, selling them to, say, brokers, and then a for-hire motor carrier has been essentially transporting these tires to, to the broker or the end destination. So we decided that, we were going to create this exclusion to not hinder really this reuse of tires, but would allow it if the for-hire motor carrier essentially reached out to Ohio EPA and received written approval. We would then have their information, and we'd have a way to make them responsible for the shipment of scrap tires until the scrap tires reach the final destination. And there were primarily two reasons why we felt comfortable creating this exclusion. The first reason is that, as I mentioned before, the trailer has been purchased, and so the tires have value, so they're less likely to be open dumped. And second, we surveyed our registered transporters, and many of them are not going out of the state anymore because of it's cost prohibitive in terms of the cost of fuel. So we didn't want to interfere with a practice that, again, allowed these tires to be reused. This exclusion is only eligible if the trailers of tires are leaving the state, so we're not impacting the finances of our registered transporters. Next slide. We also do not want to hinder the use of scrap tires for beneficial use applications. Scrap tires have a lot of really great properties that make them wonderful to get your car down the road. We can still harness those properties and use them in different beneficial use applications. And so we have become aware of the fact that there have been some times in the past when people wanted to use scrap tires in a beneficial use project, but it was either cost prohibitive to get the tires to the site because they'd use a registered transporter, or they just couldn't find anyone to transport the type of tires that they wanted to use. And so we've essentially created this exclusion that they can get written permission from us to transport the scrap tires to a beneficial use project. That project can be either one that's pre-authorized in rule or one that is approved by the director. Next slide. And then just wanted to make it very clear by providing these exclusions in rule that a registered scrap tire transporter is not required to transport crumb rubber, and that if essentially tires have been burned or partially burned because of a tire fire, you don't have to use a registered transporter to bring those to a sanitary landfill. So now I just want to touch on new information that has to be placed in a registration application. We've come to realize a lot of our registered transporters also on the same premises are tire retailers, or they are motor vehicle salvage dealers or they're tire retreaders. And so for our inspectors, sometimes they would get out to these sites and they really didn't know where the transporting operation began and ended and where these other businesses were essentially their ownership of the tires, what part was part of the, what particular business or activity. And so for these types of registered transporters, we are going to require them to submit a plan view drawing so that the inspector is knowledgeable about when they get to the site, what they're looking at. Next slide. And then some new operational requirements for scrap tire transporters is that beginning with the 2024 registration cycle, they will be required to, when we issue them their new registration certificates, they will also be issued decals that they're going to have to place on their on the windshield of their vehicles. One reason, well, two reasons for really the requirement for the decal is the impetus for it was that law enforcement wanted them to be required to have decals because it would help them in their decision whether to stop a registered transporter, stop someone that was transporting tires. But another benefit to it is that scrap tire generating businesses and operations are required to check to make sure that they're using a registered scrap tire transporter when they have their tires removed from their location. So a quick look up to a windshield to see if there's a decal there will help them in that process. We presently allow registered scrap tire transporters to use portable equipment to shred tires for load consolidation purposes. Now we've added permanent shredders as are allowed as well. So you're probably going to find that more registered transporters are going to begin to take tires back to their place of business and shred them for load consolidation purposes. And then some new mosquito control requirements. So again, we've worked really hard to try to simplify mosquito control for the whole scrap tire management infrastructure. And we're no longer going to have different requirements for when picking up from an active or inactive site, which has been something that we've had before for registered transporters. Next slide. So here I just want to kind of explain that the simplification of that mosquito control for transporters. So in the past, whether the transporter got to an active or inactive site, essentially they could get to the site, and as long as for an active site, they could certify that the tires have been treated with a pesticide within the past 30 days, then the transporter didn't have to do anything, or they had the option of removing water from the tires, shredding the tires, or treating the tires with a larvicide. But they also have the option of picking up those tires and then within 24 hours taking them to a facility. Now under 581.10, they really only have three options. Before they transport those tires, they have to either remove the water from the tires, shred or cut the tires, or treat the scrap tires with a pesticide. Next slide. So now let me go through the major changes for the scrap tire facilities. Next slide. Again, we've tried to simplify mosquito control for all the scrap tire facilities. So here I'm providing us kind of a side-by-side comparison of what has changed for incoming loads of scrap tires. So used to be that for facilities, as long as they remove the liquid from the tires within the 24 hours of receipt, or applied a pesticide or a larvicide within 24 hours of receipt, they were okay. We've removed that essentially that 24 hours to address mosquito control. And now when they receive those tires, they have to remove the liquids immediately or treat the scrap tires with a pesticide that is registered with US EPA and the Ohio Department of Agriculture. So essentially how this impacts the inspector is when you go out to the site, you should either see tires that are dry or tires where a pesticide has been applied. There's no trying to figure out, how long have they had these tires? That they, perform mosquito control within the 24 hours of receipt. Next slide. And then how these tires had to be stored at these scrap tire facilities is that they had to keep them dry. or they had to apply a pesticide. And then if an inspector got out to the site and they discovered mosquitoes, the facility was offered 24 hours to apply a adulticide or a larvicide. Again, we've kind of removed that 24-hour window. When the inspector gets out to the site, then the tires should either be dry or they have proof that they've applied a pesticide. We are going to try and, because of how this is crafted, the wording, ensure at all times that scrap tires are free of water to prevent mosquitoes and mosquito larvae habitat. We are going to kind of come up with some guidance for inspectors. When we kind of went through this, the process of, especially through interested party, we did receive some comments from tire associations saying, what does that really mean? I'm worried about so an inspector coming out to my place of business and finding water in the tire, and it might have just accumulated because there was a rain event. So we are going to provide some guidance to kind of, not necessarily what I would call, common sense, but just sometimes you're going to have gray areas and just try to give you some guidance. One example would be, if the water is frozen in the tire, then there's no concern, so yes, the water has accumulated to the point where it's frozen, but depending, if the water's frozen, we're not going to worry about it. So just helpful guidance on that kind of stuff. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned before, the pesticides that can be used has changed. Now we're requiring that the pesticide be registered with the US EPA and the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And so we are going to be providing just kind of some resources to inspectors, guidance on resources that would help them determine if the pesticide is registered with the US EPA. They do have a website, pesticide product and label system, that helps you determine if a pesticide is still registered with them. You might go out to a site and a pesticide has a registration number, but maybe it's expired or it's no longer allowed to be registered with US EPA. So we will be providing guidance or resources for you to be able to look up that type of information. Next slide. So this is just a slide showing what that website looks like. And then next slide. This is actually picture of Ohio Department of Agriculture's pesticide product search. Next slide. If you go out to a site and you find that they're using a pesticide that we know is not registered, and the person needs help choosing a product, OSU Extension has people that can help at the county level to help identify a product that could be used. And then Ohio Department of Agriculture has a pesticide product registration specialist. So we will be sharing these resources with inspectors if needed. Next slide. So for particular, let me just focus here on particular scrap tire facilities and important changes. So the biggest change for the scrap tire recovery facility is there has been a change to the definition of daily design input capacity. So the old definition was based on machine capacity and operation, and it was a little bit confusing because it meant the weight of scrap tires that can be processed at a scrap tire recovery facility per day, expressed in tons, and shall be calculated as an average daily processing amount for all operating days in the calendar month. And it could be a little bit confusing to determine if a facility was in compliance. We've now kind of shifted that definition to really align with how we operate as a division. We deal with what comes through the gate for a lot of these facilities. So now the DDIC definition is more like an AMDWR, and DDIC has been redefined to mean the maximum weight of scrap tires that can be accepted at a scrap tire recovery facility per day. Next slide. We have pretty much redesigned the scrap tire mobile recovery facility. Again, the old rules for the mobile recovery facility really, it almost looked not like quite a cut and paste from the permanent recovery facilities like the class 1 and class 2s, but how they operated, how they established through the registration application. All that was very similar to the permanent facility. And as a result, they also used a lot of the siting criteria from the permanent facilities. Well, we've removed a lot of that siting criteria because what's really happening is these mobile recovery facilities are getting out to a site and they don't have a lot of control over the environment there. They're just going there to collect tires, shred tires, maybe turn them into a product, maybe not, and remove them or leave them because they're using them in a beneficial use manner. So we've removed a lot of the siting criteria. The operational requirements align more with a scrap tire remediation project site. We are, for Class 1 and Class 2 scrap tire recovery facilities that are allowed to use mobile equipment because they have the proper amount of financial assurance, they will be required to operate like a mobile scrap tire recovery facility. And just want to point out the definition for daily design input capacity for a mobile scrap tire recovery facility has not changed. So, for the permanent ones, it really became more like an AMDOR. For a mobile recovery facility, it really still is about the amount, how much tires they can process through their equipment. Next slide. And then for monocells and monofill facilities, our disposal sites, we used to have two types of scrap tire monocells. We have the contiguous and the non-contiguous scrap tire monocell facilities. As we begin to look at how the non-contiguous scrap tire monocell facility operated, it really did not operate that differently than a scrap tire monofill facility. So we decided to get rid of the non-contiguous scrap tire monocell facility. And so now we just have the scrap tire monocell facility now is a contiguous monocell facility in the footprint of a solid waste or an industrial manufacturing waste landfill. We also, of course, always update the scrap tire monofill facility rules to reflect the latest changes to the solid waste and industrial manufacturing waste landfill rules, especially where it makes sense. And then, of course, we wanted to add in some fire prevention requirements for the scrap tire monofill facility. So two things we added is that burned tire product or burned tires that are at the site must be cooled to ambient air temperature prior to being placed in the landfill. But also there's a ASTM D2760, 6270, that really a lot of the civil engineering applications in that ASTM are related to shredded tires, and the authors of that ASTM have dealt with a lot of tire fires in the past where we're talking about shredded tires were involved. And one thing that ASTM requires, and we decided to place it in rule, is that at the point where you have 10 feet of shredded tires, you really should place a layer of soil, at least 24-inch layer of soil above that to kind of create a heat sink if there is a heating event. So we've placed that as a tire prevention requirement, tire fire, prevention requirement in the scrap tire monofill facility operational rule. Next. Yeah.
Before we move up, we do have a question about pesticide application.
Yes.
So information about what situations a commercial pesticide applicator's license is required be included in guidance for operators.
Yes, we can do that. I can make a note.
So we'll get that noted and make sure that guidance is provided to the operators.
Okay. Next slide. Okay. I just want to talk about some updates to the scrap tire beneficial use infrastructure. So here we have a picture of one of the newly approved pre-authorized uses. This patented use of tires in this manner is called mechanical concrete. Of course, we did not put that in our rule because it is patented, but the use of tires in this manner is now listed as a pre-authorized use. So next slide. Here we just identified as a tire-derived cylinder that performs as an aggregate confining system. This is one of the newer pre-authorized uses. As I mentioned before, mulch is really taken off in Ohio as a market, and so we wanted to list these as pre-authorized uses, especially if we could tie them to an ASTM standard. So playground surfacing for the cadets, put that in and tied it to the ASTM standard. And then we also listed shredded scrap tires used for landscape mulching and equestrian surfacing as pre-authorized uses. And then I mentioned ASTM D6270 previously. This particular ASTM has a lot of civil engineering applications for scrap tires, and so we essentially decided if there's an ASTM that we can point someone to, then we're going to allow the use to be used in the private sector. And so, especially for like the second bullet, shredded scrap tires used as lightweight fill or construction material in private roads and private parking. We felt very comfortable putting that new use in because we are still holding them to the ASTM standard. And then there are two others here, shredded scrap tires used as vibration damping layers for rail lines. And then, of course, hole and sidewall scrap tires used in construction of retaining walls, drainage culverts, and road-based enforcement. Again, holding them all to an ASTM. Next slide. We are going to really be beefing up the information we have available on the webpage to address scrap tire beneficial uses. So look for more guidance documents in the future. And then it's been on our to-do list for a long time is to create a notification form. When someone is using a pre-authorized scrap tire beneficial use in 580-801, they're required to notify Ohio EPA and the local Board of Health. And so we will be creating that notification form.
And we do have a hand up of Phil Revlock. You're welcome to take yourself off mute and ask a question. Unmute you, Phil. Looks like you're still muted, Phil. Okay. His hands down, so we'll continue. Phil, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Oh, okay. Next slide. Okay, just want to go over some resources quickly as we're getting up to 11 o'clock. Next slide. So, of course, because we've updated the rules, we're going to have to update our guidance documents, inspection checklists, daily logs, and other impacted forms such as shipping papers. We will be updating the EBIS registration and license applications to reflect the latest information in the rules.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Go back one.
We are going to be crafting some NOV templates for EPA inspectors, and health departments are more than welcome to use these NOV templates or at least at a minimum use them as a guide. Of course, there may be situations where we don't craft the NOV template. But if there's ever a time when, one of our NOV templates does, you find that you have a better local ordinance than like for say open dumping situations or where you have 100 or less tires involved in a situation, of course, use your own judgment and decide which is a better source. But we are going to be crafting those NOV templates, and if you want to use them, you are certainly welcome to do that. We are going to be also providing helpful guides that cover pesticides. And thanks for that question. We'll make sure we address the commercial application when they need to use them, someone like that. Share that information on retail, vendors' licenses, BMV, and then those questionable or gray areas when you're dealing with mosquito control. We have one more slide. And then where DMWIM, primarily central office, is going to do some follow-up with the scrap tire management infrastructure is to address this new definition for DDIC. We will be having to reach out to the facilities to determine if there needs to be a change to the DDIC on record. We're going to have to update their closure cost estimates. So we will be working directly with the facilities to deal with that. I didn't spend a lot of time on this, but there have been some changes to the financial assurance mechanisms that registered scrap tire transporters can use. There are presently 7 financial assurance mechanisms. We are limiting them to 4. And mainly because they primarily only use 4, but also we have removed their requirement to use a standby trust. And so they will actually, if we ever have to pull on their funding mechanism, we'll go straight into the scrap tire management fund. So some changes there that we have to provide new templates and outreach to scrap tire transporters. Also, with the budget bill that was just passed, the financial assurance for scrap tire transporters has been reduced from 20,000 to 10,000. So, the good part is that this may increase the number of registered transporters we have. The bad part is, they have to come up with less financial assurance, but that makes us equal to Michigan and Indiana, some of the surrounding states. So at least we're not below them at this point. And I think that's about it in terms of some things I wanted to cover that we're going to have to do at the central office. There may be a little bit more stuff that I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. It's not coming to me right now, but just if you find in the rules something that affects how a facility operates, like DDIC, and just know that we will be following up the facilities to make sure we get that information changed and see what that will mean for them in terms of like having to update registration certificates or PTIs or license applications. We'll be doing that before the license cycle begins.
And we did have a comment from Phil come through.
Okay.
It says fire code storage requirements have been removed from the scrap tire rules. However, the fire department can still enforce the fire code storage requirements. So we may be misleading generators that code doesn't exist anymore. So it isn't fire code, it appears.
Yes, absolutely. So, and that is just for the scrap tire businesses and operations that are excluded from having to be scrap tire facilities. So we as an agency are still going to be enforcing fire code, or even requiring maybe something even more stringent than a fire code for our storage facility, collection, storage, and recovery facilities. So I definitely agree with you. We do not want inspectors to tell scrap tire generating businesses like tire retail shops and retreaders that they don't have to follow the fire code. We just are not going to be enforcing it anymore. And it will be done on a local level. One of the reasons we removed it is because our inspectors will go out, not just EPA inspectors, but health department inspectors. Our inspectors will go out and they would cite our regulation, and then the store would say, well, the fire department was just here and they're cool with how I'm storing these tires. These tires are touching roof structures, but they have no problem with it. And so we say, if the fire department has determined that they have the resources to put out a tire fire, or if building code is allowing these types of operations to go into these buildings, even though they can't meet the fire code, we're going to let them deal with it at a local level. And we're just going to focus on mosquito control and making sure the tires do not leave the sites, because that is contributing to the open dumping that we're still experiencing at a lot in the state.
And another question has come into, when will the new updated inspection checklists be available?
So those should be up by now. The only thing that's not up right now, because we are going to be updating it to match the new logo, are the daily logs. The inspection checklist, to the best of my knowledge, went up last week. They are they're formatted a little bit differently than how they were in the past.
And we did have a couple comments of people weren't able to access the Excel spreadsheet for the crosswalk.
Okay.
I re-uploaded that. If it's still not working, we can send that out as an attachment in Excel. It might be a security issue with Teams here, but we'll make sure that gets out to you. And if there are any other questions, I still can't access it. So yeah, we'll get that out to you then. If there's other questions, feel free to raise your hand, type them in the chat. Happy to answer those. Give you just a minute here. And also, just a reminder, we have requested one registered environmental health sanitarian credit for this workshop. Not yet been approved, but there's a survey you can complete that or request credit, or you can also email me, but we'll put that information in the chat. One other one, we get a copy of this PowerPoint. I could share, Shannon.
Sure.
Yeah, so we can go ahead and make that available too. And next question, can you clarify the 24-inch soil layer for the 10-foot lift at a tire monofill?
Yeah, so essentially, we only have one in the state, and that's owned by Liberty, but essentially, and we will have to talk to the health department inspector that presently inspects Liberty, as well as Column, who is the EPA inspector working with the health department. Our expectation is that once they have put in 10 feet of shredded tires, they will apply geotextile fabric to that layer and then just put 24 inches of soil on that. Now, maybe the question is whether that's compacted or not. If that's the question, that's not my expertise, and I'd probably have to defer to Annette and ask her if we're just talking about 24 inches of loose soil or compacted.
Next question, about video recordings. So as soon as this meeting is over, it should be available in Microsoft Teams, but we will also put it on the Ohio EPA YouTube. And we can also let those of you who attended this workshop, I know many of you accepted the calendar invite, so we can get that to you too when that link is working.
And did I answer the question about the landfill okay, or was there any more?
Yeah, yes, that came from Phil Revlock.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So he said he'll contact you later.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Yep.
Okay, another question. Who would be the best contact at Ohio EPA if we discovered an unregistered transporter has been transporting? Central office or our local district office first?
So the district office is always the best contact. I mean, typically the registration of a registered transporter is a central office function. We're the ones that help them kind of get their application in the eBiz, and but the inspectors are always the ones that actually tend to send out the notice of violations, identify these transporters, and also inspect them to make sure that they can comply with our regulations. So I would reach out to the district office first. But if it's just a matter of someone saying, I didn't know I have to be a registered transporter, you can always have them reach out to me, and we'll get that ball rolling for them.
Great. So as we mentioned, feel free to put those questions in the chat. You can email me or also use the raise hand function, and we'll take you off mute and you can ask your questions. We'll give you another minute. See any rolling in at the moment. Right, yeah. We're not seeing any other questions come in, so we do appreciate everyone participating in today's webinar. As we mentioned, one registered environmental health sanitary credit has been requested for the webinar. It's not yet been approved, but you can complete the survey that was put in the chat, or you can email me to request credit for those, and we'll submit those after they have been approved. If we're not seeing any additional questions, we greatly appreciate all of you attending today's webinar. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to Shannon Cohen at epa.ohio.gov, Shannon.Cohen. Make sure we've got that right, and ask your questions in the future. We appreciate everyone attending, and thank you, and we'll sign off.